All right, it's time for my monthly wrap-up video. Today we're going to be ranking 11 Blu-rays that I watched for the first time over the past month, August 2023. Let's get going. What's going on, my friends? Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel, and this video is coming out a little bit later than I normally like it to in the following month, the month after August, and that is because towards the end of August, I actually got my appendix removed, which was a very unexpected thing. I guess it always is. It just comes on very suddenly, and you got to deal with it immediately. And thankfully it went pretty well. I am still in recovery. I'm moving slowly, but I still really wanted to get this video out for you. So this is my first video filming post-surgery. Hopefully it all goes pretty good. Feeling a little bit better each day. But that surgery and some other factors meant that this stack is a little bit smaller than it normally is. Like I said, we got 11 Blu-rays to talk about, and they're all sticking with the horror and thriller genres. I don't normally have like a plan for August. I'm not planning to jump right into the spooky season. I think of that as September and October, but usually in August, I just get really excited and I can't help myself. So we got a lot of horror movies here, but I did try to hold myself back a little bit, try to sprinkle in some other things, and those all ended up being thrillers. So those are the two genres we're going to talk about. So without further ado, let's get going. So one thing that I did in August is I did a video on this Arrow video box set, Gothic, Fantastico, and 4 classic Italian Gothic horror films. And I'm going to be ranking all 4 of them here, but I won't talk about them too much because there's an entire video about that set you can check out if you want. And at the bottom of this list, at number 11, is the Blancheville Monster, which is, I believe how you pronounce it, which is a Gothic horror film that kind of riffs on Edgar Allan Poe. It was made to capitalize off of the Vincent Price Edgar Allan Poe films that were being made back in the 1960s. And for me, it was just slow and boring. It has kind of a plot for about the first act, and then it loses its way so hard and is just like nothingness for so long until you get to an ending where something happens, but it's ultimately pretty disappointing. I was not into this movie. It's easily my least favorite from this stack. At number 10, we've got a Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray that I picked up in the Halfway to Black Friday sale and checked out. That is Evil Laugh. This is a 1980s slasher movie. Interesting thing about it is it was actually directed by one of the cast members of Friday the 13th Part 5, the chocolate stains guy who gets axed towards the beginning of that movie. That actor actually directed this film. And if you thought that his directing talents would be on par with his acting talents, that's pretty much true. Evil Laugh is not a very good movie. It's not without its charms. What a weird plot. It's about medical students who come to this old house to fix it up because a couple of the students who are engaged to be married are going to turn it into some kind of like hospital for orphans or something like that. It's kind of confusing and doesn't make a lot of sense with the kind of people that are there because they don't seem like medical students. They just seem like your standard partying slasher teenagers. Very weird. The characters are just off the wall in this movie and nobody that I particularly was interested in following. And the most disappointing thing is if you look at the cover of this, you got this Grim Reaper looking skull guy. You also see him in the alternate cover art right there, and he looks awesome. Yeah, that is nowhere to be found in this movie. It's just a guy wearing, I don't even know what he's wearing, but it looks nothing like this. He looks so lame. So it's super misleading, which is disappointing. And the kills, apparently, the kills were filmed like after the movie was done and then added in because it was decided it didn't have enough blood and gore. And I can only imagine how tame this movie was before they did that, because the kills are nothing to speak of, really. It's kind of funny, especially towards the end of the very end of the movie is almost like the worst ending I've ever seen to a slasher movie. And then the final moment, something happens, and I was like, whoa. Okay, I'm surprised you went there, and I am impressed. So almost a horrible ending, but ended up having kind of a cool ending. But it is not good. And the reveal to the mystery, good lord. No. At number 9, back to the Gothic Fantastico set, we've got The Third Eye. This is Franco Nero, essentially trying to be Norman Bates. This movie clearly took a lot of influence from Psycho. It's about a young man who loses his over-domineering mother and his fiancée to death in the same day. and just descends on a path of madness, almost kind of aided by his housekeeper who is in love with him. And he starts becoming a serial killer. And the things that happen in this movie are pretty sick, pretty twisted, but most of it is a lot of it's pretty under the radar because they don't want to go too explicit with it. Apparently, this film was later remade as a film, I think called Beyond the Darkness, that makes all of the implicit much more explicit and is a super disturbing movie. I'm still kind of curious to see that movie, but I haven't yet. But I thought The Third Eye was decent. It's pretty good. Next up, The Witch, also from Gothic Fantastico set. I'm kind of sick of talking about this movie because I've talked about it in 2 videos, both my top 15 witch movies video and the video on this set. But this is a good movie that's just too long, and that's essentially what I'm going to say. But it does have some satisfying witch content for you witchy folks out there. All right, that was a lot of horror movies. Let's go with a thriller and the first appearance of Alfred Hitchcock on this list, but not the last. And that is I Confess. This is the Warner Archive release of the 1953 Alfred Hitchcock film. What this is about is Montgomery Clift is a priest, and a man comes to confession with him and confesses that he murdered someone. And now Montgomery Clift, not only does he now know that, but he can't tell the police, he can't tell anyone because of that sacred confidentiality from the confession booth. And I'm not, nor have I ever been Catholic, so I don't know if that's even true, because I know that like the doctor-patient confidentiality for like psychiatrists and such doesn't exist when it involves the harming of someone else. Like that's when they break that confidentiality. And I would imagine it's kind of similar for priests. Like if you tell a priest that you murdered someone, can they really not tell the police? That seems weird, but I don't know. I don't want to criticize anyone's religion. I'm just saying that doesn't sound real. But anyway, that's the premise of this movie, and he ends up becoming a suspect in that murder, even though he really knows the true outcome. And I thought this was pretty good. But here's the thing. After I watched it, I was like, okay, yeah, that was good. I rated it 3.5 stars. And then I thought about it and realized so little of it stuck with me that I lowered it down to 3 stars. I was like, I can't even think of why that deserves like a 3.5 stars because it's just kind of standard. I think one of my biggest problem with this movie, and I'm sorry to say it, especially for big fans of him, is Montgomery Clift. I just didn't think he was that good in this movie. I thought he was really flat. Believable as a priest, just as like a super calm, super even-keeled guy who's like probably a good temperament to be a priest. But he also has a romance with Ann Baxter. It turns out that they have a whole history before he became a priest, and there's this love that they can never have now. And I never for 1 second believed he had the slightest interest in her. They had no chemistry. I never felt like he cared whatsoever. And so that whole aspect of the movie did not work for me at all. And towards the end of the movie, I don't know. I just felt like there's really only one way this movie is going to go. So it's just watching it get to that point. And a lot of Hitchcock movies are not like that. Hitchcock movies have a lot of suspense. What's going to happen? Oh my gosh, who's going to die? Like who's the killer? What's going on? This movie, you know exactly what's happening from the start, and you know what's going to happen by the end. It's very obvious. I thought it was okay, well made. Alfred Hitchcock knows what he's doing, but can't go any higher than that. Next up, we've got, the Inner Sanctum Mysteries box set. I got this from Mill Creek years ago, and when I got it, I watched one of the movies. I remember I watched The Frozen Ghost, and then it sat on my shelf for a long time, and I didn't pick it back up. I watched 2 more this month. Essentially, these were a run of movies back in the 1940s that were based on radio plays from that same time. They're all starring Lon Chaney Jr. They all open with this like head in a crystal ball talking about murder. It's a very consistent run of movies. They're all about an hour long, so they all go down real smooth. And from what I've seen so far, they're all competent, entertaining movies. None great, but all pretty darn good. Good spooky time is what I would say. They're all a good spooky time. And I checked out Weird Woman because I did a binge on witchcraft films. It's a witch movie. It's actually based on the same book that Burn Witch Burn is based on, which is one of my favorite all-time witch films. And it's definitely not as good as Burn Witch Burn, for sure. But it's still, it's a good story and it's competently told. I like Lon Chaney Jr. in it, like the supporting cast. It's a pretty good version of that story about a man who marries a woman from a tropical native location and brings her back to his country and finds that she is still holding on to the tribal beliefs, the witchcraft beliefs. And he makes her stop and then he feels the effects of the loss of her witchcraft protections. It's just a good story, and it's a pretty good version. And then I also checked out Calling Dr. Death, which is a story about Lon Chaney Jr., who's a doctor, and he blacks out one night, and then the next morning he finds out his wife, who he kind of hated, was murdered. And he honestly doesn't know if he did it or not. So it's about, could I commit murder? Did I do this? And it's pretty entertaining. These are just pretty solid. I like these. I'm looking forward to going through the rest of them. If you're interested in me doing a dedicated video on this set, I'm happy to do it. I honestly just don't know if anyone cares. So let me know down in the comments below if you want a video on the Inner Sanctum mysteries. All right, at number 5 is The Crimson Cult, otherwise known as The Curse of the Crimson Altar from 1968. This is a Tygon horror film, which was a company that was kind of like Hammer and Amicus, a British horror film company. I watched this because of my Witch Movies binge, even though I had this Blu-ray for a long time. Finally checked it out over the past month. What it's about is a guy whose brother disappears in this small village. So he comes to the village to try to find him. And he ends up staying at the house of Christopher Lee. And he meets Christopher Lee and Boris Karloff, these two boys from the town. And the town is obsessed with this ancient witch who actually Barbara Steele plays right here. And they have this whole witchcraft festival to her and such. The small village atmosphere and the witch festival stuff, and just the fact that I love color horror films from the 60s. I just had a great time with this movie. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was very entertaining. I thought Boris Karloff was particularly great in this movie. Now, he's always great, but he's really funny in this. He's just this really funny, crotchety old man who gets really upset if somebody doesn't have anything profound to say about how good his brandy is. And he's just really, really funny. Now, the witch content is a little bit disappointing, especially by the end. It's not the best. It's not great, but atmospheric, fun, color, 60s horror movie, totally up my alley. At number 4, we've got The Big Easy. I got this in my recent Kino Lorber sale haul. This is a 1980s thriller, actually from 1987, starring Dennis Quaid as a New Orleans cop. This movie takes place in New Orleans, and Ellen Barkin as an assistant district attorney. And essentially, they are investigating a murder, but I wouldn't really say this is a murder mystery movie. What it is it's a film about uncovering really big corruption into the New Orleans government, especially with the police force, because Ellen Barkin is this assistant DA who is kind of dead set on catching dirty cops, and then Dennis Quaid is a cop, so he's kind of caught in the middle of these things. And I enjoyed this movie. I thought it was pretty good. It's just kind of that good, slick 80s type movie. I wouldn't say it's an erotic thriller, but it does have one very erotic scene. So other than that one scene, it pretty much plays out normally for the rest of it. The performances are really, I think, what make it, particularly from Dennis Quaid, who is hamming it up so hard. His thick Cajun New Orleans accent is kind of hilarious, but also kind of awesome. He's just like 1980s Dennis Quaid is just like exactly what perfect human masculinity is. Like, he's just like the perfect human specimen in this. He's just kind of awesome. And Ellen Barkin is fun to watch too. She's good in this as well. It's just a slick 80s thriller. I had a pretty good time. I didn't think it was great. I think by the end, when all the mysteries are uncovered, you're just kind of like, oh, okay. It's not going to blow your mind or anything like that. But it's the performances from these two, particularly Dennis Quaid, that make it. At number 3, the last film from that Arrow set, and it is Lady Morgan's Vengeance. Definitely my favorite movie from the Gothic Fantastico box set. This is a pretty fun gaslight type thriller about a woman who marries a man that she didn't want to marry, him trying to convince her she's insane so that he can get money. And then when the vengeance comes into play, it becomes this awesome supernatural horror movie with like ghosts and vampires and so much cool stuff. The Gothic atmosphere is out of this world with the graveyards and the fog. If you're just like a spooky time Gothic horror fan, this movie has so much to offer you. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good time. At number 2 is the next appearance of Alfred Hitchcock, and that is The Man Who Knew Too Much from 1956. This is starring Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day, and it's actually an example of Hitchcock remaking one of his own movies. He actually made this movie in the 1930s. I know Peter Lorre was in it. I've never actually seen it, but I actually went with watching this one first because I love this era of Hitchcock the best, the 1950s, 40s, 50s. That tends to be my favorite time for him. I guess 60s too. I love a lot of periods for Alfred Hitchcock, apparently. And I love these stars. I mean, Jimmy Stewart, come on. What this movie is about is a family. Jimmy Stewart, his wife Doris Day, and their son. They're on vacation in Marrakesh, and they meet a mysterious man, and they watch him get murdered. And as he's dying, he whispers something to Jimmy Stewart. And now Jimmy Stewart is hotly in demand from a lot of good people and bad people because he knows something that everybody else wants to know. But in order to keep his mouth shut, the bad people have kidnapped his son. So now the movie is more so a thriller about trying to save their son, trying to get their son back, than it is about the political intrigue regarding the spy stuff about what it is that he was told by this dying man. And I thought that was a really smart idea, because if it's just about the political intrigue of assassinating a prime minister, which is ultimately what it is about, I think that would not be enough to really get an audience on board and to get us emotionally invested. What's really emotionally investing in this movie is the parenthood stuff. It's the terror and the desperation about not knowing where your kid is and not knowing if you're ever going to see him again. And I really liked that. And I thought Jimmy Stewart and Doris Day were really good as a married couple. They functioned as a good team. And you don't see that for couples or married couples in movies very much. So often when you get a movie like this with a married couple, they have to like start the movie separated or start the movie at odds, and then they learn to love each other again by the end, or there's all kind of BS like that. And I like that in this movie, they're just a solid team working together through this whole film to get their kid back. And I thought they worked really well together. I thought that was pretty great. Now, one thing I will say is, on a personal note, I watched the first half of this movie in a lot of pain, not knowing I had appendicitis and not being able to finish it because of my situation. And then I watched the second half after I got my surgery and I was feeling better. So I thought the second half was a lot better than the first half. But I don't know if that was just me. It could very well just be me. But I did think the second half was awesome because it is a tension machine. It is so intense. I thought it was pretty amazing. Like, there's this fantastic sequence in this classical music orchestra concert in which you don't hear any dialogue. You just hear the loud music, but you're seeing everything going on. And it's this really intense sequence. It's pretty awesome. So I definitely prefer the second half, but also that could very well just be me. This is a good movie. And let me know down in the comments below if you think the 1930s one is as good and if I should check it out. But one thing I will note is I went on a little bit of a Hitchcock run last month, and this was not my favorite Hitchcock movie that I watched last month. My favorite one, I'm not officially ranking here, was The Trouble with Harry. And that's because I watched it on DVD I rented from my library. Don't sleep on your local libraries, folks. You gotta support them because they're a great resource. But anyway, I won't talk too much about this, but by far my favorite Hitchcock discovery in a long time. A great murder, dark comedy with incredible autumnal atmosphere in the countryside. Great performances. I actually have a video coming out fairly soon. I'm planning where I will talk about this movie a little bit more. But I love The Trouble with Harry. So that would be my favorite Hitchcock of the month. But since it doesn't quite count in this list, it's going to be The Man Who Knew Too Much. Now, for my number one, a movie that I actually did a video on last month, and that's The Company of Wolves, the Scream Factory 4K of The Company of Wolves from 1984. This is sort of a telling of Little Red Riding Hood, but it's more so an anthology of a lot of different fairy tales and folk tales revolving around werewolves. So it's a really cool werewolf movie with some of the greatest werewolf transformation sequences I have ever seen in any movie ever, but also just a great fairy tale, folk tales kind of film with that kind of feeling, that kind of magical atmosphere in the enchanted forest that I really crave sometimes. And I love that about this movie. That's the Scream Factory 4K art, but I love the original poster art right there. Looks so cool. This is an incredibly unique movie directed by Neil Jordan, who also did the adaptation of Interview with the Vampire. Very well directed. Like I said in my video, not one of the most eye-popping 4Ks I've ever seen, but it's already such a great movie that's fine. So my number one of the month month is The Company of Wolves. So that's it, everyone. All of the Blu-rays I watched for the first time over the previous month. Let me know down in the comments below, what did you watch in August? What stood out to you? I would love to hear from you. Give a like to this video if you enjoyed it, and a subscribe for more videos like this. If you missed it, my last video was on my top 15 witch films, which I really enjoyed, and people have been super nice in the comment section. Really appreciate the support to that video. Thank you so much. With all that said, enjoy your September. Have some good autumnal fun, and I'll see you next time.